What's up, gamers? God knows I was with Sony till the very end, loyal to them for years and years. But the further we went, the worse it got. In 2024, my fading loyalty was like an autumn leaf, slowly but inevitably breaking away from the branch. In 2025, that leaf fell off completely. Why though? What exactly made Sony worse? I've outlined 5 solid reasons why I got disappointed in Sony, both as a game publisher and as a platform holder. If you've got your own reasons, I'd love to see them in the comments. Enjoy the video. First reason, consoles aren't getting more affordable. Usually, here's how it worked. A new console drops with, let's say, a $500 price tag. Over the years, manufacturing these consoles gets cheaper since the hardware inside doesn't change, so Sony can lower the console prices. This usually happened with slim versions. This time, that didn't happen. In fact, prices are going up. And I'm not talking about recent price hikes due to tariffs, that's understandable. I'm talking about the price when the slim version launched. The absolute audacity happened with the PlayStation 5 Pro release, selling for $800, when realistically, it should cost $500 max. Because the only things that changed are the GPU and SSD memory doubled, which you can value at around $70. And considering Sony gets it cheaper due to contracts, let's say $50. The GPU, became more powerful. The console got the PSSR upscaler, which works okay at best. I already showed comparisons in a separate review. These changes don't justify a $300 price bump, especially when all other internals stayed the same as regular PlayStation 5s. And after 5 years, all of those components got way cheaper to manufacture. Right now, for the price of a PlayStation 5 Pro, you can build an awesome PC with a Ryzen 7500F and RTX 5060 Ti. That PC will deliver visuals that are just leagues better. So why get a console that has tons of disadvantages compared to PC? Usually consoles won their appeal through being cheap, but Sony killed that advantage. And honestly, I don't see any other advantage. PC has more games, they're cheaper, free online play. Sony exclusives now come to PC too. You can control games not just with a gamepad, but with whatever you want. Hell, you could wire up potatoes and bananas, bind actions to them, and play. I'm not even joking. The only plus is no cheaters, but even that's not everywhere. You can also game on PC lying down in front of your TV, graphics are better even on builds that cost the same as the Pro, and FPS is higher. What's even the point of consoles now with such pricing? Realistically, to stay attractive, PlayStation 5 Slim should be selling for around $300 right now and the Pro for $500. That would actually be appealing, because at that price point, you can't build a decent PC and gamers on that budget simply wouldn't have a choice. It used to be normal to sell hardware at break-even or slight loss, since you'd make money later through game sales and subscriptions. Now Sony wants to profit from everything, including PlayStation Plus. If you've been following the monthly games for at least a year, you know Sony's been giving away mostly either complete trash and garbage or super cheap indie games. Good ones, but still cheap. Very rarely do we get something actually worthwhile. And on top of that, they remove games from the subscription every month. Sometimes they remove more than they add, so the subscription is getting less and less packed. And with all this, the price keeps going up and up. A year of PlayStation Plus Extra already costs $135, Premium is $160, and rumors are circulating that there's going to be another price hike soon. A year of PlayStation Plus already costs like a third of the console. I won't lie, I see dozens of comments under my videos about people stopping their PlayStation Plus payments and either playing purely single-player games or building PCs, where online doesn't require PlayStation Plus, and games are so cheap that even without giveaways, it's fine. Plus, there are Epic Games giveaways that are free and don't require subscriptions. You could justify such pricing if PlayStation Plus was like Game Pass, meaning we'd get all Sony releases and some third-party developer games on day one, but we don't get that at all. Instead, we get stale giveaways. Second reason, it was originally called something else, but I decided to name it short and clear: games. This problem is complex. Focus on the wrong games that Sony is loved for. Huge amounts of remasters and remakes of games that don't need them, and overall, a drought in the quality department. This is all tightly connected, so I didn't separate it. Remember 2015, 2016? Hell, the great 2018, when in 200 days Sony released God of War, Detroit, Spider-Man, and Astro Bot VR. We were literally swimming in amazing Sony releases, and now you look at, 2023, for example. What came out? Controversial Spider-Man 2? That soy DLC for Horizon Forbidden West? And in 2024, Astro Bot? Okay, that's actually quality. The Last of Us Part 2 remaster? The game played fine without a remaster. Oh right, the remaster of the first Horizon, which nobody even knows why it was needed. Like anyone was complaining that the first part looked outdated. What else came out? Conquered? That one that didn't even hit 1,000 players at launch and died almost immediately? They shut the game down without even letting it live for a month. Great investment of several $100 million Sony dollars. If you look at the number of releases, yeah, there are still many, but if you start analyzing what these releases actually are, you'll see that more than half are remasters of games that play beautifully without remasters, plus garbage live service games like Conquered that die before they're even properly born. Because of incompetent people in PlayStation leadership, Sony Studios spent a long time working on live service games, most of which they eventually canceled, even the quite promising Spider-Man Online. Wasted millions of dollars and years of life went nowhere. That's why we didn't get as many releases as we could have if Sony hadn't decided to jump on the live service bandwagon. And she jumped, broke her neck, twisted her legs, scraped her lips, and lost all fan trust. Sony games were always loved for excellent story-driven games, so let her keep doing that instead of getting into fields that aren't hers. The online games field is already taken. You can't reinvent the wheel. I used to justify Sony by saying PlayStation 5 was still just getting warmed up. In 2023, I said that PlayStation 4's first 3 years were pretty weak too. Only Bloodborne managed to stand out, coming out in 2015, but now PlayStation 5 is almost 5 years old, and in these 5 years there were really only 2 important releases. That's Astrobot and Ragnarok, and even Ragnarok came out on PlayStation 4 too, so within PlayStation 5 context, it only half counts. Everything else is either trash like Conquered, unnecessary remasters like Horizon Remaster, or good but not that groundbreaking games. PlayStation 4 is known as the console of masterpieces. PlayStation 5 is now known as the console waiting for masterpieces, and the life counter of this generation already passed the 50% mark long ago. It's approaching the end, just 3 years, and focus will shift to PlayStation 6. I want to speak separately about remakes and remasters. The problem isn't the phenomenon itself, but what exactly falls under it. Preserving your legacy is good, as is giving some games a second and sometimes third breath. But the problem is that you need to update much older games, especially from those console generations that don't fall under backward compatibility technology. Take Killzone and Resistance, which remained locked on the generation before last and are literally screaming for remasters. But instead of them, Sony takes games that sometimes aren't even 6 years old, that still look excellent. We don't need to go far. Days Gone Remaster. That remaster whose differences you had to search for with a magnifying glass, putting 2 images side by side. And developers spent considerable time on it, and developer time is money. Serious money. And if you could still justify the first TLU remake by saying the studio wanted both franchise parts to look visually identical, then the Until Dawn remake is absolutely incomprehensible to me. The original sold okay, there's no sequel coming, why? And the remake still hasn't managed to break even, barely anyone bought it. If Sony employees really care about legacy and memory, they should shift the remastering radar to at least 5 years back. And if you're gonna remaster games that came out on PlayStation 4 and play through backward compatibility on PlayStation 5, then better remaster Bloodborne, which is technically wheezing, farting, and already riding in a wheelchair. Low resolution without anti-aliasing and 30 FPS in our time is unacceptable. Such a game needs a good remaster so you could play at least at 60 frames and 4K. Sony's near future is murky. The focus is on games like Fair Game Tollers, another Conquered-like disaster that I guarantee will flop at launch. And on Marathon, which deserves the title of humanity's ugliest game, on which hundreds of millions of dollars have already been spent. Dollars that could have been spent on actually quality story masterpieces. From single-player games, only Death Stranding 2 is planned this year, and that's not even from a Sony studio, but from Kojima, Ghost of Yote, which so far causes mixed reactions, and for 2026, only Wolverine so far, which for the 4th year hasn't moved past the first trailer, and possibly Sorrows from Returnal developers. That's all Sony has for us so far. Third reason, backward attitudes toward exclusivity. Sony still sincerely believes someone will buy their gimped machine just for another timed exclusive. In our time, when almost all publishers are moving toward gaming globalization and gamer freedom, so everyone can play where they want and what they want. Crossplay is being introduced everywhere so people can play with each other regardless of platform. Platform boundaries are blurring, but Sony still clings to outdated principles, cutting game sales by multiples. And it'd be one thing if she only did this with games from her own studios, but she also forbids partner games from releasing anywhere except PlayStation 5. Thank God, only recently some releases started coming out simultaneously on PlayStation 5 and PC. Silent Hill 2 came out right away on PlayStation 5 and PC, but still isn't sold on Xbox. Even though the game really needs sales, on PlayStation 5 and PC, this game doesn't have that many. Some third-party developer games still don't even come to PC immediately. Take Stellar Blade. The game was held hostage by PlayStation 5 for just over a year and barely managed to sell 2 million copies during that time. As soon as the game came to PC, within 3 days sales reached 3 million copies. Because surprise, surprise, gamers exist not only on PlayStation 5. This policy is especially destructive for Sony's own games. She has genuinely amazing games like Ragnarok or The Last of Us, but they don't come to PC right away. First, they marinate on PlayStation 5. And not only does the hype for the game pass, but Sony also gives PC versions of her games to inexperienced studios that don't always do their job well. Remember Spider-Man 2 on PC, which even after 10 patches still only works well on builds costing $1,000 or more, and shaders still flicker in places. Everyone laughs at Sony games on Steam. Well, they're online numbers there, since within Steam context, these are pathetic numbers. And Sony is to blame for this. Yes, good games are always played, even years later, but by small groups simultaneously. The hype moment is important. If Sony released her games simultaneously on PlayStation 5 and PC, they could multiply simultaneous sales, because hype is hype. Especially since Sony invests in advertising specifically during PlayStation 5 releases. All PC versions come out as quietly as possible. You're lucky if they show a couple trailers, and even then not at presentations, just randomly on the YouTube channel. You can't treat your own games like this, and especially not partner games. Final Fantasy XVI also sold so-so, and guess why? The PC user audience is gradually increasing, which can't be said about console gaming right now. We don't need to look far for examples. Capcom released statistics clearly showing how the balance of power is shifting from consoles toward PC. And this is a telling example. It's time for Sony to acknowledge the obvious fact. Exclusivity policy doesn't work in the stationary gaming platform market. You need to keep up with the times and provide access to your games to anyone willing to pay for them. Although, what am I talking about? Sony only figured out in June this year to add her games to Steam regions where there's no PSN. That's Kazakhstan and over 100 other countries. Half the world doesn't have PSN, and accordingly, Sony wasn't selling her games through Steam there. Stupidity that ordinary human logic can't understand. And after such shenanigans, Sony is still surprised why her PC games sell poorly. Maybe because you shouldn't limit the number of countries where the game can be bought. And here, we smoothly approach reason number 4, boring presentations. Let's go back to the past. Everything always becomes clearer through contrast. 2016. Sony shocked the entire world then. In an hour and a half, they showed us announcements of God of War, Detroit, Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Death Stranding. Just think about what concentration of absolute quality that was. Viewers got tired of gasping. And you look at modern presentations after that, viewers get tired of yawning. Sony showcases have become a meme because they're awaited for years. Sony has so little to show that she has to do only rare, small state of plays where 99% of game showings aren't from Sony studios. Every month, insiders get excited and seemingly race to write that a showcase is coming soon, and every time there's no showcase. After this, PlayStation 5 owners ask a reasonable question. Where are Sony's games? Why did I buy a PlayStation 5 when I could have gotten an Xbox Series X, which has everything except Sony games, but it has Game Pass with tons of fresh releases? Or just build a PC, which would be the best solution today. Since Sony games come there now, Microsoft games too, and there's even Game Pass, Sony doesn't have presentations anymore that make you drool. The last one like that was 5 years ago. And think how many story games they could have started making and later announced with those $3 billion Sony wasted on talentless people from Bungie. Every time I think about this, I immediately feel uneasy. $3 billion is the budget for 10 The Last of Us 2s combined, and all this for Garbage Marathon. How is this possible? It's painful. Fifth reason, some games became too stretched out. This is one of the problems of the gaming industry as a whole, which affected not only Sony. Because of various idiots and whiners who used to scream, "Ew, a 15-hour ending for $60 I won't buy," we see games bloated to unimaginable sizes that take much longer to make and that most players struggle to finish. Statistically, at best, maybe a third of players finish such games. Horizon is 50 to 60 hours, Tsushima about the same. Such games have overly stretched plots and unjustifiably huge open worlds that you'll simply get tired of exploring. And they don't give you any unique experience. It's just huge decorations with same-type enemies and question marks. You shouldn't even try to make an open world unless you're Rockstar. Because of such whiners who don't want to pay much for short games, Sony and many others started churning out long games. Developers rarely focus on making their best game anymore. More often, they say they're making their biggest game, but we're not asking for that. You can check this yourself. Remember 5 of the coolest linear games lasting 10 to 20 hours and 5 open-world games lasting 50 to 100 hours that you managed to finish or just played. Compare specifically the most emotional moments of these games and count how many there were in each. you'll see that those short games often give more emotions and stick better in our consciousness than stretched out chewing gum. Yes, there are incredibly rare exceptions like The Witcher or Yakuza, but usually long games are pure tedium. Compare The Last of Us 2 at 25 hours with some new Assassin's Creed at 100 hours. The Last of Us 2 has more emotions in its first 3 hours than in all recent Assassin's Creeds combined. Because of bloated game length, their budgets grow too. And what's more painful? Development time grows. Maybe you've heard? Development is getting more expensive. Development takes longer and longer. Why is it longer and more expensive? Because they're trying to sell us monstrously stretched games, creating the illusion that we're getting more. But in reality, we get more when we play a not huge but very event-dense game for every hour of gameplay. The very first The Last of Us, in my opinion, is the ideal length for a story game. I calmly finished it in 3 to 4 evenings while experiencing more emotions than in, say, Horizon, which you'll be playing for 2 or even 3 weeks. Some Assassin's Creeds I stretched out for half a year because their plots are presented so diluted. Sony used to excellently publish amazing 10 to 20 hour games, but now aims for some extreme values that only suffocate the player instead of delighting them. And Sony completely forgot about AA games and went entirely AAA. And I consider this a huge problem. I'd rather get 3 excellent 15 to 20 hour games from one studio over 6 years than one just okay 60-hour game. You can also apply this stretching to the lifespan of some franchises, not just individual games. Sony is very afraid to experiment, so she only makes games she calls safe sequels, games that will definitely sell. They're stretching Aloy's story to 3 parts, plus released a VR game, Lego game, making 2 online games. Ghost of Tsushima was also originally planned as a trilogy. Because of fear of producing something new, we see essentially the same games in the same genres. I used to incredibly praise Sony for 7 years straight. Almost in every video, I made content only about her consoles, praised almost every move, promoted Sony gaming to the masses. That's why this topic is very personal and painful for me. Few quality releases from Sony Studios, remasters, and remakes are the wrong games that need them. Pathetic presentations, games bloated for no reason, fixation on the same franchises and genres, overpriced costs, and backward exclusivity policy. These are my main complaints about Sony and her PlayStation consoles. These problems accumulated like a snowball rolling down a mountain. And this ball is still rolling and still growing. Thanks for your attention. I'm waiting for your opinions about modern Sony in the comments. We'll hear from each other soon in new videos.